A wife or another winter alone? That's the choice waiting on Cole Brennan's doorstep, though he doesn't know it yet. Picture this: Montana Territory, autumn of 1887. The first snow is falling in slow, silent flakes, the sky a flat gray sheet over miles of empty land. The wind pushes against a small ranch house, its windows glowing with warm light. A man stands inside that house, tall and broad, with a face burned by sun and years of hard work. This is Cole Brennan, the cowboy who says no to every woman. Tonight, there's a knock at his door. He opens it, and there she stands, a woman in a worn coat, snow in her hair, eyes steady and unafraid. She lifts her chin, and in a low, calm voice asks him the question no one else has dared to: a wife or another winter alone? We freeze right there, because this moment is not now. It is coming. Before we reach that night and that bold woman, you need to know why the whole town whispers about Cole Brennan, and why he has turned every woman away like a man who would rather freeze than share his fire. Cole's world is wide, but his life is small. The Brennan Ranch sits at the edge of town, a spread of rough land with good grass, a worn barn, and a neat little house that stands straighter than most men in the territory. Cole keeps it that way. He is capable, steady, and quiet. He rises before dawn, lights the stove, brews strong coffee, and rides out to check fences and cattle while most people are still asleep. He comes back when the sky turns orange, eats whatever he has thrown together, and spends the evenings mending gear or reading old letters by lamplight. It is a good life in many ways, honest and orderly, but it is a lonely one. People in town say he likes it that way. They say he is married to the land. Of course, that doesn't stop them from trying to fix him. A few years back, the banker's daughter made the first attempt. She was young, polished, and full of talk about improving the ranch. She arrived in a feathered hat and gloves that had never seen dirt. Cole treated her kindly. He helped her down from the buggy, listened while she spoke of curtains and wallpaper, then gently told her no. She left with tight lips and wet eyes. After her came the widow from the livery, strong and kind, with a little boy hiding behind her skirt. She brought stew and bread and a heart ready to build a new life. Cole helped her carry the pot inside, thanked her, and again said no. Then the new school teacher tried, soft-spoken, serious, with ink stains on her fingers and poems in her head. She thought a quiet man would be easy to love. Cole walked her back to town before nightfall, keeping a respectful distance, and sent her away with the same answer. In his living room, on the stone mantel above the fireplace, there is a single photograph face down. The cabin is clean and spare. A few books, a well-oiled rifle, a neatly folded blanket. But that one picture, turned so no one can see it, draws the eye. Visitors notice. They pretend not to. Cole never mentions it. When curious hands drift toward it, he simply says, "Leave it," in a tone that ends the conversation. The town does not know who is in that photograph, but they have their guesses. A lost love, a dead fiancé, a woman who broke him so cleanly he has never recovered. They do not know if their stories are true, but they talk anyway. By the time the leaves turn gold and the air grows sharp each year, everyone in town has heard of the coal problem. At Miller's General Store, where the stove in the corner is always crowded in cold weather, the matrons of the town gather to trade news and worry about other people's lives. Mrs. Miller counts beans and sugar while listening with half an ear. Mrs. Jenkins folds fabric. Mrs. Hart polishes her spectacles. They talk about weather, prices, and then, as the first frost hits, about survival. Last winter, 3 bachelors in the territory froze to death when they tried to ride through a storm alone. That memory hangs over them like a cloud. A man living out on his own, with no one to watch his back, is a risk they cannot ignore. And Cole Brennan is the biggest risk of all. He'll freeze out there, mark my words, Mrs. Hart says, shaking out a bolt of wool. That man needs a wife before the snow sets in. Needs more than a wife, Mrs. Jenkins replies. Needs sense. So we give him both, Mrs. Hart answers firmly. Sense and a wife, or at least a woman in his kitchen. They decide it is time for an intervention. Not a loud one. They are respectable women, but a gentle, planned, and very deliberate attempt to solve the coal problem once and for all. And they have just the woman in mind. Dorothy Ashford is not the prettiest girl in town, but she is one of the kindest. She is in her late 20s, past the age when most women have already married, with steady hands and a soft smile. Her father runs the feed store, and she helps him keep the books. She bakes good pies, sings in church, and is known for her calm nature. The matrons decide Dorothy is sensible, reliable, and not easily scared. They also know she has watched Cole from a distance for years, her eyes following him when he comes into town for supplies. Dorothy does not speak of it, but the older women see everything. So they gather around her near the barrel of flour and lay out their plan. A friendly visit, they say. A nice pie, still warm. No pressure, just a talk by the fire. Dorothy's cheeks flush pink, but she agrees. It is, after all, almost winter. No one wants to see a good man die alone in the snow. That's how they frame it, anyway. By the time she leaves the store, Dorothy holds a fresh apple pie in her arms and a rehearsed speech in her head. The sky is already heavy with gray when Dorothy rides out to the Brennan Ranch. Her horse snorts at the cold, its breath white in the air. The land stretches wide and empty, the grass stiff with frost. She sees the house at last, smoke curling from the chimney, a small promise of warmth in a harsh world. Her heart beats fast. She smooths her skirt with one hand, steadying herself. This is not just about her. This is about helping a stubborn man survive. At least, that's what she tells herself as she walks up to his door and knocks. Cole opens it, tall and quiet as always, his eyes cool, but not unkind. "Afternoon, Miss Ashford," he says, stepping back to let her in. The house smells of coffee and with smoke. Dorothy sets the pie on the table, fingers trembling slightly. She makes small talk at first about the town, the early chill, the cattle prices. Cole listens politely, nodding now and then. But Dorothy did not ride all this way just to talk about weather. Her rehearsed words press at her lips, and at last she lets them out in a rush. She tells him the winter will be hard. She tells him he should not be alone. She says she would be honored to help, to share the burden, to make sure the lamps stay lit and the house stays warm. Her voice shakes once, then steadies. She does not quite say, "Marry me," but the meaning is clear. She offers herself, her work, her care. Her eyes shine with hope and fear. Cole looks at her for a long time. The clock ticks on a shelf. The wind whistles faintly at the window. He is a good man, and he knows she deserves an honest answer. He takes a breath, choosing his words with care. "Dorothy," he says quietly, "there is nothing wrong with you. You're a fine woman. Any man would be proud to have you." Her shoulders relax for half a second, waiting for the rest. "But," he adds, his voice softer now, "everything is wrong with me." The words fall heavy between them. Dorothy's fingers tighten on the edge of her shawl. She forces a small smile, but her eyes fill with tears she cannot stop. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't say anything cruel. He is gentle, steady, and firm. There is no room in his life, he explains, no place in his heart that he can offer her. It is not her fault. It is his, or so he believes. Dorothy leaves with her head bent against the cold wind, the empty pie tin tucked under her arm. The matrons will ask how it went. They will see the answer in her red eyes and set mouths. Back at the Brennan Ranch, Cole closes the door, the silence of the cabin pressing in all around him. He picks up a log, feeds the fire, and goes back to his work. On the mantel, the face-down photograph stays just as it is, guarding its secret. The town will call it another failure, another wasted chance, another sign that Cole Brennan is beyond saving. They will shake their heads and warn that a man like that will die alone one day, frozen in his pride. But fate isn't finished with Cole Brennan. Out beyond the town, beyond the empty fields and the coming snow, a woman is already riding toward him. A bold stranger with her own ghosts, her own scars, and a question that will change everything. 3 days after Dorothy Ashford's tearful visit, the land wore its first white coat of winter, and the wind cut sharper than a blade. The sun barely broke through the clouds, turning the fields into a gray sea of frost. Cole Brennan, as usual, was out mending the north fence line, his gloves stiff with cold and breath fogging the air. The world was quiet until the faint rhythm of hooves approached. Out of that silence rode a woman alone. She was no fine lady from town. Her coat was dust-stained, her hat low against the snow, and her horse limped, one leg wrapped in cloth. When she reached the broken stretch of fence, she slowed and called out in a strong, even voice, "You've got a post split clean through." Cole turned, squinting through the snow, not sure what to make of her. Most women wouldn't ride alone this far from town, especially in weather like this. She swung down from her horse, boots crunching on the frost, and ran a gloved hand along the broken rail. "If you don't fix this soon," she said, "you'll have half your herd out by nightfall." There was no hesitation in her tone, no flirtation, just fact. "You're a long way from anywhere," Cole said at last. "So are you," she replied. That made him pause. He watched her check the horse's leg, noticing her calm, capable hands. She wasn't delicate. She wasn't afraid. He offered to take a look at the animal, and for the first time, she smiled, small, quick, gone before he could even name it. Her name, she said, was Margot Webb. She'd been traveling since late summer, working where she could, heading north before the heavy snow trapped the trails. When Cole asked if she had people waiting for her, she only said, "Not anymore." He didn't press. Together, they led the horse back to his barn. She spoke little, her movements efficient as she unsaddled the animal and rubbed it down with dry hay. When Cole offered coffee, she nodded, following him inside without ceremony. It was the first time in months that another voice had filled his kitchen. She stood near the fire, warming her hands, while Cole poured 2 tin cups of steaming coffee. They talked in short pieces, her name, his, the weather, the storm coming fast. She told him her horse wouldn't make it far till the leg healed. "I'll stay a few days," she said, like it was a settled thing. Cole raised an eyebrow. Not many folks asked before deciding that. Margot shrugged. "Didn't sound like you had company lined up." He didn't argue. Something about her composure held him quiet. She looked around the cabin with sharp eyes, taking in the neat order of things, the tools by the wall, the turned-down photograph on the mantel. Her gaze lingered on it for a heartbeat before moving on. Finally, she looked back at him. "You're the one who says no to everyone," she said matter-of-factly. Cole froze, halfway through a sip. "Town's not big," she continued. "Word travels." He didn't respond. She set down her cup. "Then maybe you'll appreciate someone who's not here to ask for anything." He frowned. "You said you needed shelter. And you need help," she said simply. He opened his mouth to argue, but she stepped closer, voice low and steady. "A wife or another winter alone? Which one actually scares you more?" Cole's throat tightened. The fire popped, throwing shadows across the walls. No one had ever said it like that. Not as a proposal, not as pity, but as a challenge. She didn't blink under his stare. "I'm not asking you to love me," she said. "I'm asking if you're smart enough to survive." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he asked, "You think you can survive a Montana winter with a stranger?" She gave a dry laugh. "I've survived worse than strangers." Her tone carried the weight of truth, not bravado. She went to the door, pulled on her gloves. "You think about it. The snow's coming harder. You need an extra pair of hands." She stepped outside into the white, walking back toward the barn to check her horse. Cole stood there, jaw tight, something stirring in his chest that felt dangerously close to interest or hope. When he looked out the window, she was already halfway across the yard, her figure a dark blur in the storm. He muttered under his breath, "What kind of woman rides into a blizzard?" Then answered himself softly, "The kind who survives one." That night, The wind howled against the cabin walls, and sleep came slow. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she moved like someone used to fighting through hard days, about her question that hit deeper than she knew. A wife or another winter alone? He'd spent years telling himself he didn't need anyone. Maybe he'd just gotten good at believing it. When dawn came, he stepped outside and found her already there, feeding her horse from a bucket she'd scrounged from the barn. "You're up early," he said. "Old habits," she replied. "You think any more about my offer?" He hesitated. "You didn't make one." She gave him that small ghost of a smile again. "Sure I did. I said I'd work for shelter." He studied her face, the faint scar near her chin, the eyes that didn't flinch. "You a ranch hand?" he asked. "Wasn't once. Learned to be when life stopped giving choices." He nodded slowly. "We'll talk inside." By the time they sat down at his table, steam curling from their cups again, the decision felt half-made. Margot spoke plainly. She'd been a homesteader's wife once. Her husband had died 2 winters ago when a blizzard caught him on the trail. The land was seized soon after. She'd been drifting since. "I can cook, mend, haul water, keep a fire lit," she said. "Don't need anyone to talk fancy to me or tell me I'm fragile." "I'm not." Cole listened in silence, the storm tapping against the window pane. He laid out his own terms. She could stay through winter as housekeeper in hand. They'd keep separate rooms and no questions about the past. She agreed easily enough, but added rules of her own. "You don't treat me like a servant. We share the work. And if the town asks, you tell them I'm here by your choice, not because I begged." He gave a half smile. "You always negotiate this hard." "Only when I plan on staying alive," she said. He stood, offered his hand. "Deal." Her handshake was firm, steady, and just like that, two loners made a pact against the cold. After she went to the barn, Cole found himself standing before the mantel again. His hand hovered over the face-down photograph, the same way it always did when memories try to claw their way back. He turned away. Whatever ghosts haunted that picture, they didn't belong in the deal he'd just made. Outside, through the frosted window, he saw Margot leading her horse into the stable, her figure a small, determined shape against the endless white. She wasn't like the women who came before, didn't smile to please, didn't soften her words to be kind. She spoke like a man, worked like one too, but something about her presence filled the silence in a different way. That evening, the storm thickened until the world beyond the door vanished. Margot cooked a simple meal, beans and bread, and they ate mostly in quiet. Now and then, her gaze wandered to the photograph on the mantel. Finally, she said softly, "You had someone." It wasn't a question. Cole's jaw tightened. "Had. She's the ghost you're still feeding," Margot said, not unkindly. He looked up sharply. "You read people quick," he said. "I had to. It's the only way to stay alive, traveling alone." He didn't answer. She studied him a moment longer. "You need someone who won't expect romance from a man who's already given his heart to a ghost." The words hit harder than he wanted to admit. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, because there was no defense against the truth. She saw through him in 5 minutes what most people never saw at all. When she rose to clear the dishes, he found himself saying the one word that terrified him most. "Stay." She paused, looking back at him. That an order or an invitation? He met her eyes. A request. She nodded once, and the faintest smile returned. "Then I'll stay." The wind screamed outside, snow piling against the door, but inside the cabin a quiet warmth began to settle. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both understood it. This was not love, not yet. It was survival, maybe even something simpler than that. Two wounded souls deciding, just for one winter, not to face the cold alone. Evening fell thick and heavy over the Brennan Ranch, the wind carrying the promise of deeper cold. And inside the cabin the fire burned low, throwing soft gold light across the rough wooden walls. Cole sat at the table, his hat on the peg, coffee cooling beside him, as Margot laid out their agreement. She would stay until spring, keep the place running, and help with the herd in exchange for room, board, and fair respect. Separate rooms, no questions about the past. Cole added his own. Don't touch the photograph on the mantle, don't ask about the woman in it, and don't let the town believe she was Charity. They shook hands, the crackle of the fire the only witness. It was supposed to be simple, business, survival. But when her rough palm met his, something shifted, something small and unwelcome that neither of them spoke of. The next morning began like a quiet rhythm forming on its own. Margot rose before him, made coffee black and strong, and had bread baking by the time he came in from the barn. She worked with the same sure steadiness as he did, mending harnesses, fixing a sagging door, hauling water, as if she had done it all her life. When she spoke, it was mostly about the work, feed ratios, snow depth, tools that needed oiling. Cole found himself listening longer than necessary, answering more than he meant to. The silence that used to feel heavy began to feel full. As the days stacked into weeks, Margot's presence left traces everywhere. A repaired curtain, a patched coat on the peg, clean dishes on the shelf. The cabin began to smell faintly of wood polish and herbs drying by the stove. They rarely sat together, but when they did, there was an ease neither one could explain. Once she handed him a cup of coffee without asking how he liked it. And somehow, it was exactly right. When he came in soaked from fixing a frozen trough, she wordlessly handed him a dry shirt, her eyes flicking up to meet his before turning away. Outside, winter spread like a thick blanket. The cattle huddled against the cold, and each morning the world glistened under new frost. The people in town started talking again. Someone spotted them at the supply store together, buying flour and lamp oil. "She's living out there now," Mrs. Hart whispered at the store counter. "With him," Mrs. Jenkins gasped. "A woman alone at Brennan's place?" "He said she's with him," the storekeeper added with raised eyebrows. Didn't sound like a denial. Whispers turned to rumors, and rumors became stories. Cole didn't care much about gossip, but when he saw the way the Stairs followed Margot on their next trip to town, he made it clear where he stood. When a drunk at the saloon called out something crude, Cole's fist answered quicker than words. By the next morning, no one in town questioned who Margot was to him, at least not out loud. Inside the cabin, their rhythm deepened. She fixed the old rocking chair by the fire. He repaired the latch on her window. They learned each other's habits without trying. She hummed softly while cooking, always the same tune. He always paused before turning in, glancing once toward the mantel as if to make sure the photograph still lay face down. One evening, while dusting the shelves, Margot's elbow brushed the frame. It slid, toppled, and landed face down on the floor. When she bent to pick it up, her eyes caught the image before she could look away. A young woman with dark hair pinned back, her expression soft, alive, frozen in some distant joy. Margot's breath hitched. She set it upright carefully, then lowered it back to the mantel, but this time upright, not face down. Cole stepped in from outside, just as she turned. His eyes went straight to the photograph. The air between them turned heavy, the silence sharp enough to cut. "You touched it," he said quietly. "It fell," she replied, matching his calm. "Didn't mean to." "You saw her," he said, and it wasn't a question. She nodded once. She was beautiful. His jaw flexed. Was. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he reached out, turned the picture face down again, and said in a voice that carried the weight of finality, "Don't." Margot didn't apologize. She only said, "All right," and returned to her chair. The only sound after that was the fire crackling low. By mid-November, the storm everyone had been dreading arrived. It came howling out of the north, a wall of white that swallowed sky and land alike. The cattle huddled in the draw, and for 3 days the ranch was cut off from the world. On the first day, they worked side by side, checking the barn, securing shutters, and bringing in extra firewood. When the snow thickened and the wind began to roar, they retreated inside. The storm turned the world to darkness by noon. Cole found a deck of worn cards and taught Margot how to play. They laughed once, quiet, almost awkward, like two people remembering how to. On the second day, with the wind still screaming outside, Margot finally spoke of her husband. She said his name, Daniel Webb, and how he died in a blizzard not unlike this one. He thought he could make it home before night, she said softly, eyes on the fire. He didn't. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. We weren't in love. Not really. He was kind, I was grateful, and sometimes that passes for love. Cole listened in silence, something stirring in him that he didn't recognize. Respect, maybe, or understanding. He poured her another cup of coffee, their fingers brushing, neither pulling away. On the third day, the storm reached its worst. The wind howled like wolves, shaking the walls, snow seeping through cracks. Cole sat near the fire, staring into it, and after a long stretch of quiet, began to speak. His words came slow, halting. Her name was Anna, he said. Margot looked up, surprised by the sound of her name on his lips. He kept his gaze on the flames. We were engaged. 5 years ago. He told her about the train to Denver, how Anna had gone ahead to visit family, how outlaws attacked along the route. The train had burned. Some passengers were found. Many were not. They never found her body, he said. So I waited and waited. His voice broke just slightly. Can't marry someone else when you don't know if she's dead or just gone. The fire snapped, throwing sparks. Margot said nothing for a long time. Then she reached across the table, her hand hovering just over his. Sometimes not knowing is the cruelest kind of loss, she said. It traps you between mourning and hope, and neither one lets you breathe. He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding too deep for words. The storm raged outside, but inside, something had softened. When morning finally broke, the world was white and still, the ranch blanketed in silence. Cole stepped out onto the porch, his breath fogging in the cold, and looked over the land. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Inside, Margot fed the fire, her figure small and strong against the flickering light. He watched her for a moment, thinking about the deal they had made, how it was supposed to be simple, clean, temporary. But nothing about her presence felt temporary anymore. She had filled the silence that once felt endless, replaced ghosts with warmth. The storm had passed, but something inside him had changed with it. When she looked up and caught him watching, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said she saw right through him again. He turned away before she could read too much in his eyes. The blizzard had broken, but the walls around his heart hadn't. At least, not yet. Late November slipped quietly into December, the snow lying deep enough to hush even the sound of footsteps, and inside the Brennan Ranch, the days began to move with a rhythm that felt almost gentle. Cole and Margot worked side by side now, their partnership wordless but sure, like two musicians who had learned to play the same tune without speaking. Every small thing had changed. The cabin warmer, the meals shared, laughter coming easier though neither one meant for it to. Margot hummed softly while sweeping, an old tune she never named, and sometimes Cole caught himself listening, his hands stilling mid-task. At night, when the fire burned low, they would sit across from each other, the air thick with things unsaid. The unspoken closeness grew stronger every day. One morning, she climbed a stool to reach the high shelf where he kept his winter blankets, and when he stepped forward to steady her, his hand brushed her waist. She froze. He did too, both caught in that thin electric moment where the world narrows to breath and heartbeat. For a second, she thought he might kiss her. Then he stepped back, jaw tight, and muttered, "I should check the barn." She turned away quickly, heart pounding in her chest. That night, neither slept much. She told herself it was foolish to feel anything. He told himself it was wrong. But both knew that something between them had shifted. When the town's Christmas social came around in late December, the snow lay high along the road, and lanterns glowed soft through the frosted windows of Miller's Hall. Cole hadn't planned to go, but Margot insisted he shouldn't let gossip keep him home. She wore a simple dark blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Hart. Nothing fancy, but when Cole saw her step down from the wagon, his throat went dry. She didn't look like the quiet ranch hand who'd ridden in on a lame horse. She looked like a woman who belonged anywhere she wanted to. Inside the hall, laughter and music filled the air, fiddles and boots tapping on wood floors. Folks turned to look when they entered together. Whispers rose. "That's her," someone murmured. "The one living out at Brennan's place." Cole ignored them, offering her his arm. Margot smiled politely, dancing with others when asked, her laugh light, genuine, but Cole's eyes followed her across the room. When a young rancher spun her too long, he felt something stir, a rough, protective ache that surprised him. When the song changed, he crossed the floor, cutting in without a word. "This one's mine," he said quietly. Margot blinked up at him, half startled, half amused. "They think we're courting," she whispered as they moved. "Let them," he said, his hand tightening at her waist. The room around them blurred, their steps falling into rhythm, the space between them vanishing until the music ended. For one brief, impossible heartbeat, Cole almost leaned in, but applause broke the spell. She smiled sadly. "You'll ruin your reputation," she teased. "Don't have much of one left," he said. And for the first time in years, he smiled. But fate, as always, had its own timing. Just as the laughter swelled again, the door opened to a burst of wind, and a tall man in a city coat stepped inside, shaking snow from his shoulders. The music faltered. The man's voice carried clearly as he asked, "Is there a Cole Brennan here?" Cole straightened, the warmth draining from his chest. "That's me." The man approached, removing his hat. "Name's Fletcher, private investigator out of Denver. I've been trying to find you for some time." The room went dead quiet. Margot felt her stomach twist as the man continued. "It's about your fiancée, Anna Whitmore." Every sound seemed to vanish. Cole's face went pale, his hand falling from Margot's waist. "What about her?" he asked, voice low and rough. Fletcher reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "She hired me," he said simply. "She's alive." The word struck like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the room. Margot's fingers clenched around her skirt. Fletcher went on, unaware or uncaring of the storm he'd just unleashed. "She's in California now. Said you'd want to know the truth." He handed Cole the letter and stepped back, hat in hand, while the crowd whispered. Margot could feel every pair of eyes on her. Cole stared at the paper, frozen. The music didn't start again. Nothing did. When he finally looked up, Margot saw a flicker of something break inside him. Relief, grief, disbelief, all tangled together. Outside, snow drifted through the lamplight, cold and still. Cole left the hall without a word, the letter clutched tight in his hand. Margot stood where she was, surrounded by curious faces, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She had no right to follow, no claim to make, but still she did. By the time she reached the wagon, he was already halfway down the dark road, boots crunching in the snow. She didn't call out. She just watched his shape fade into the night. Inside the hall, people started whispering again, words sharp as sleet. "She's alive. Poor Cole. That woman he brought, imagine the shame." Margot lifted her chin and walked out into the storm. Back at the ranch, Cole sat at the table, staring at the unopened letter as if it might vanish if he waited long enough. Margot stood by the doorway, her breath misting in the cold air. "You should read it," she said softly. He didn't answer. "Whatever it says, at least you'll know." He looked up then, eyes dark, lost. "I don't know if I want to." "Not knowing is worse," she replied. After a long silence, he broke the seal with shaking fingers. Margot turned away, giving him privacy, but the sound of paper unfolding still seemed too loud. She watched the snow outside, her reflection faint in the window glass. After a minute, she heard his breath catch, and her chest ached with an old, familiar pain, the sound of someone breaking quietly. He said nothing more, just folded the letter again and set it down. She's alive, he said finally. Married, has children. Margot's heart squeezed. Then you can stop waiting, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're free now. But his eyes looked hollow. Free, he repeated, as if he didn't know what the word meant. That night, he didn't sleep. Neither did she. She could hear him moving in the next room, pacing, the floorboards creaking under his boots. When dawn came, she found him sitting on the porch steps, the letter beside him, the sky just beginning to lighten. She wrote that she's sorry, he said quietly. Said she was too ashamed to come back. Said she built a new life out of what she had left. He rubbed a hand over his face. All these years, I kept her ghost alive for nothing. Margot didn't know what to say. She wanted to touch his shoulder, to tell him he wasn't alone, but her hands stayed still at her sides. Sometimes ghosts die twice, she said gently. Once in the world, and once when we finally let them go. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw tears in his eyes. I don't even know who I am without her, he murmured. Maybe that's what you're supposed to find out, she said. He turned his gaze back to the horizon. The sun rose slowly, gold over white, painting the land in light. Neither spoke again for a long while. The silence between them wasn't the same as before. It was heavier, full of endings and something uncertain just beyond them. As the wind eased and the day brightened, Margot went inside, heart tight. She wanted to believe that what they had built these past weeks still meant something, that it hadn't been just a pause between ghosts. But as she packed away the breakfast dishes, she heard him strike a match. When she turned, she saw the letter burning in the fireplace, flames curling its edges until it was nothing but ash. Cole stood there, shoulders tense, watching it burn. She waited for him to turn, to speak, to tell her what that meant, but he didn't. He only said, "It's over," then walked out into the snow. Margot pressed her hands to her chest, steadying herself. The blizzard had come and gone. The ghosts had spoken, and yet she felt colder than ever. She whispered to the empty room. Then what happens to the living? Outside. Cole's figure disappeared into the pale horizon, a man freed and lost all at once. While behind him the cabin glowed warm with a fire neither of them knew how to share anymore. The morning after the truth broke through them like ice. The ranch felt hollow, too quiet for comfort, too full of things unsaid. Margot packed in silence, folding her few belongings with rough, steady hands, pretending it didn't hurt. She told herself from the start this was temporary, just winter, just survival. But lies, even kind ones, have a way of cracking when the heart gets involved. Cole found her by the door, coat half-buttoned, bag in hand. "What are you doing?" he asked, though the sight already told him. "Spring came early for you," she said without turning. "You're free now. You can find a real wife, one that fits what the town expects." He took a step closer, voice low, tired. "A real wife." She met his eyes then, her own rimmed red. "I broke the rules, Cole. I fell in love with you, and I can't stay here and watch you remember someone else." The words cut like wind through an open door. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the fire's soft crackle. Then he said quietly, "You think you're not what I want." She started to speak, but he moved closer, blocking her way. "You're right," he said, voice rough as gravel. "You're not Anna." She flinched, as if struck. "Then there's no reason for me to stay." But he didn't step aside. "You're the woman who called me out when everyone else pitied me," he said. "The one who fixed my fence before introducing herself, who cooked strong coffee and never asked for anything but truth." He paused, eyes softening. "Anna was my past. You're my present. And if you'll have me, you're my future." Margot shook her head, tears spilling now. "Don't say things just because you're lonely." "I've been lonely for years," he said. "That's not what this is." He reached for her hand, hesitating like a man afraid of hope. "You asked me once which scares me more, a wife or another winter alone. Turns out it's living without you. She let out a shaky laugh through her tears. That's my line. Then answer me, he whispered. Her bag slipped from her hand to the floor. She stepped into his arms, the first true warmth of the season, finding them both. Outside, the wind eased, snowflakes drifting light and slow as if the sky itself had softened. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people finally choosing each other after too many years of silence and ghosts. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long sleep. The town buzzed with news, but Cole didn't care. He rode into town with Margot beside him, her head high, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm. So it's true, Mrs. Hart whispered from the store porch. Looks like the ghost finally let him go. Cole didn't correct her. The truth didn't need explaining. They spent the days repairing fences, preparing for spring thaw, laughing at small things that didn't matter, but somehow did. Sometimes she'd tease him, "You sure about this, Brennan? You don't look like the marrying kind." He'd grin. "Guess I'm learning." In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, her hand in his, quiet and easy. For the first time in years, he didn't turn the photograph on the mantel. He didn't need to. One night, he picked it up, looked at Anna's face for a long moment, and then placed it gently in a box. Not to erase her, but to make space for the life that had finally arrived. When Margot saw, she didn't speak. She only crossed the room, kissed his temple, and whispered, "That's enough." January came with pale skies and brittle air. The wedding was small, just the sheriff, the Millers, and a handful of neighbors who'd seen too many lonely winters not to cheer for a happy one. The ceremony took place right there on the ranch, the snow packed clean around the porch. Cole wore his best coat. Margot's dress was simple but beautiful, cream wool with lace at the cuffs. When the sheriff asked if he took her to be his wife, Cole said, "I choose her. Every day. Not because I have to, but because I want to." Margot's voice shook only once as she answered, "I stay. Through every winter, every storm. We're stronger together." When the vows ended, he kissed her softly, and the crowd clapped like thunder against the cold air. Dorothy Ashford was there too, her eyes kind, her smile genuine. She hugged Margot and said, "He needed a woman who could stand beside him, not behind. You did that." That night, the cabin glowed brighter than it ever had. The wind outside sang low across the land, but inside there was laughter, warmth, and the promise of something new. They danced once by the fire, no music but the sound of crackling wood and two steady heartbeats. Later, when the world quieted again, they sat wrapped in a single blanket, watching the snow fall through the window. "Do you ever think about her?" Margot asked softly. Cole nodded. "Sometimes, but she's a part of who I was. You're who I am." She rested her head on his shoulder, content with that. The flames flickered low, and outside, winter's grip began to ease. For the first time since he could remember, Cole Brennan didn't dread the passing of time. He was no longer a man haunted by what he'd lost, but one grateful for what he'd found. A love steady enough to weather the cold and real enough to last beyond it. The ghost between them was gone, and in its place stood something far stronger. Life, love, and the warmth of a new beginning. January sunlight spilled across the Brennan Ranch like a quiet promise, and the day of their wedding dawned pale and clear, the kind of winter morning where breath turns to mist and snow glitters like glass. There was no grand ceremony, no fancy dress or orchestra, just Cole, Margot, and a few friends gathered by the porch, their breath fogging the air as the sheriff cleared his throat to begin. Cole wore his cleanest coat, his dark hair combed back, while Margot stood beside him wrapped in cream, wool trimmed with lace she'd sewn herself. The town had come to spite the cold. Dorothy Ashford, Mrs. Hart, the Millers, even old Jenkins from the store. For once, the whispers had turned to smiles. The sheriff spoke the words steady and slow, the kind of words that root deep when said by people who've learned to love through winters. Cole's voice was low but sure as he said, "I choose you. Every day. Not because I have to, but because I want to." Margot's hand trembled only once as she answered, I stay. Through every winter, every storm, we're stronger together. When a sheriff told him to kiss his bride, Cole leaned down, and their first real kiss was soft and certain, the kind that doesn't need witnesses to make it true. The crowd cheered, and even the cold air seemed to lift, the wind swirling like it wanted to join the celebration. Dorothy hugged Margot, whispering, You gave that man his life back. Cole clasped her hand, smiling in thanks. There were no fine gifts, only the warmth of neighbors, pie from Mrs. Miller, and a pot of hot cider passed between hands. It was enough. That evening, after everyone had gone and the snow lay unbroken again, Cole and Margot sat by the fire, still wearing their wedding rings like something unreal they were afraid to lose. The cabin glowed golden with lamplight, laughter echoing faintly in the rafters. It feels strange, Margot said, watching the firelight dance across his face. Not bad, just like I've stepped into someone else's dream. Cole smiled, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. Mine too, he said. Only this one's real. They danced for the first time as husband and wife right there on the worn rug. No music but the wind and the soft crack of the fire, their movements slow, clumsy, and perfect. Later, when they stepped outside, the stars stretched endless above them, and Cole pulled her close, whispering, You feel that? The quiet? That's peace. Spring came slowly that year, shy but steady. The snow melted from the fence posts, the creek began to run again, and color returned to the land. Cole repaired the barn, built a new fence, and began planting the small patch of land Margot had always wanted for a garden. She spent mornings teaching children from nearby farms how to read and write in a small corner of the property they turned into a schoolhouse, her laughter carrying on the wind. Evenings were theirs alone. Coffee on the porch, hands brushing, stories about the day. Once she found him sitting at the table, an open box in front of him. Inside lay the photograph, the one that had haunted the mantel for years. He stared a long time, then picked it up and smiled faintly. She looks happy, Margot said softly. She was, he replied. So am I. And with quiet reverence, he placed the photo back in the box and set on a shelf. Not forgotten, just finally at rest. When a photographer from town came to take a new picture for their marriage certificate, Cole didn't hesitate. He stood with Margot on the porch, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling the kind of smile that comes from having survived what should have broken them. That photo went on the mantel, open and proud, the past finally balanced with the present. Months drifted by in a peace neither had dared imagine. The ranch flourished, the cattle grew strong, and every morning began with the same ritual. Margot's quiet footsteps, the smell of coffee, and Cole's soft greeting. Morning, Mrs. Brennan. She'd smile every time, as if hearing it anew. When the spring rains came, they worked side by side through mud and thunder, laughing when the horses spooked or the wagon stuck. Life wasn't perfect. Money was tight, and storms still came, but it was theirs. They built it one small piece at a time, with hands calloused from work and hearts made soft by love. By the time autumn returned, the ranch was thriving, and Margot had begun to slow her pace. Cole noticed first how she grew tired quicker, how she pressed a hand to her stomach when she thought he wasn't looking. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he asked quietly, You going to tell me? She smiled, eyes bright. Tell you what. He leaned closer. That I'm not the only Brennan under this roof anymore. Her breath caught, and she laughed softly. You always were too observant. His grin broke wide. You mean? She nodded, placing his hand over her belly. Spring, maybe late March. For a long time, he said nothing, just held her hand there, off filling the quiet. Then he whispered, Guess I'll have to build another cradle. You know how? She teased. I'll learn, he said, his voice thick. I've had a good teacher. When the first snow of the next winter came, it fell softly over the land, wrapping the world in white just like the year before. But everything had changed. Margot stood on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, watching the flakes spin in the cold air. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. His hands slid gently over her rounded belly. "Hard to believe it's been a year," she murmured. "Last winter, I thought I'd die out here." "Last winter," he said, kissing her temple, "I thought I'd never live again." They stood together, quiet, watching the snow fall over their land. The chimney smoked lazily, the cabin windows glowed warm, and somewhere inside, a new cradle waited by the fire. "I was so afraid that day I knocked on your door," Margot said, her voice low. "Thought you'd turn me away." Cole smiled. "Best mistake you ever made." She turned her head, meeting his eyes. "Best risk I ever took." He chuckled softly. "Second best." "What's the first?" she asked. "Saying yes." She leaned back against him, both of them smiling as the world turned white again. Inside, the fire burned steady, casting its golden glow over the mantel where their portrait now stood. No ghosts, no shadows, just a man and woman who had learned that love doesn't erase the past. It simply gives you a reason to stop living there. The wind whispered against the walls, the snow danced outside, and Cole thought of the question that had started it all. A wife or another winter alone? He pulled Margot closer, whispering, "Thank God you asked." She laughed softly, resting her hand over his. "Thank God you answered." And as night settled over the Montana hills, the cabin light flickered like a beacon in the dark, a symbol of everything they'd built: resilience, warmth, family, and the courage to choose love over loneliness. Some stories end with promises. Theirs began with one. And for the rest of their days, through every storm and every season, Cole and Margot Brennan would keep it. For in a world that could take everything, they had found the one thing worth keeping: a home built not from walls or wood, but from two hearts that had finally stopped running from the cold.